All right, welcome back. We're going over the 10 main differences that I see between broadcast and print. We covered 1 through 5 in the first video, so now in this one we're going to do 6 through 10. So let's go ahead and get started with the last couple. Difference number 6. In broadcast, the way we attribute information or the way we handle quotes is completely different than print style. First, let me talk about attribution. Which again, if you remember, attribution is where you're getting the information. It's an incredibly important part of this part of the storytelling process. In print style, you can say this: Jones confessed to murdering his wife, police said he could face the death penalty if convicted. Let me read that sentence again. Jones confessed to murdering his wife, police said he could face the death penalty if convicted. Again, when you're looking at it, you know that police said is going to Jones confess to the murdering of his wife. But again, let's listen to it. Jones confessed to murdering his wife, police said he could face the death penalty if convicted. To the ear, you don't know where that police said is going. It could be for the first part, or it could be police said he could face the death penalty if convicted. So you're not the person who's reporting or who knows that Jones confessed to murdering his wife. Police are the ones who told you that. So it's really important to attribute that information. So in broadcast, we'd flip that, and the attribution goes at the beginning. Again, changing said into say. Police say Jones confessed to murdering his wife. He could face the death penalty if convicted. Okay, does that make sense? Second, we handle quotes completely different. And let me stop to say, most importantly, quotes are going to probably be sound bites in your story. So we'll actually hear from the person themselves, himself or herself. But sometimes you will want to paraphrase a quote. So let's say that this is a print style quote. I felt like I was at home, said President Obama. Well, that might be kind of a lame soundbite that you don't want to include in the story itself, but you do want that information. So same thing, you make the attribution go at the beginning, and then you just paraphrase. President Obama says he felt like he was at home. So attribution always goes at the beginning of the sentence, and a very important difference between broadcast and print. A couple of more notes. Like I just mentioned, most of the time quotes are going to be sound bites, so it's better to actually hear from the person than to try and paraphrase what they said. Sometimes you will have to use paraphrase. That's completely fine. But if you have great sound, go ahead and use the sound. That's what it's there for. You also always need some kind of title or descriptor every time you introduce someone to a story. So it doesn't matter if that person is famous or just a regular citizen. You need to give us some information of who that person is before we hear from them. So Governor Greg Abbott says blah, blah, blah. Police Chief Howard Williams, Texas State President Denise Trouth, MASCOM Major Von Wolf, San Marcos resident Stephen Torres. You get the drift. Everyone needs a title, and that title goes before the name. So Professor Dale Blassingame, student John Smith, the title goes before the name in broadcast. Difference number 7. In print, you don't have to worry about pronunciations because people are reading it in their head. They're not reading aloud. In broadcast, not exactly the case. So we have to actually say things aloud. So you need to let your talent know how to pronounce something. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is my favorite because his name is kind of fun to say, even though he's kind of an evil guy. Former president of Iran. So if I was doing a script about Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, I would need to do this. I would write his real name, and then after it, I would put a literal pronunciation. So Mahmoud is how you say his name. So I would phonetically spell it out there. Then I would write his last name, which you see there, and it is pronounced Ahmadinejad. So I would, again, phonetically spell it out. So this is what you see on the screen is actually what would be in your script. The real name, followed by the pronunciation, real name, pronunciation. How often do you need to do this? If you had to stop and ask, how do I pronounce that? Probably a good idea to go ahead and put a pronunciation. Another thing is if something is pronounced strangely, so like Blanco, the Blanco River, some people might see that, especially if they're new to town, and immediately think it's Blanco. So in those situations, you might actually write out blank O. it's a case-by-case basis. But something like Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, rest assured you're going to need a pronunciation. One more important point about names, if the name isn't completely vital to the broadcast story, don't even worry about it. So a lot of times crime stories, think about the crime stories you see on TV news, like the little 15-second robbery or shooting. You're not seeing the name of the shooter or the victim. It's because the name isn't important. It just kind of bogs the story down. We just kind of give the facts and move on to the next story. When you write a package, a main story, you will have names associated with it. But for the shorter ones, you might not even necessarily need the person's name in the story. Difference number 8. In broadcast, punctuation helps you read. So we use punctuation to our benefit in broadcast in a way that will not look correct. So I say that up front, that it's going to look weird on your scripts. And you might think there's no way this is correct. But in broadcast, it does, or it is the way we write because it helps us say this. So we use a dash and or an ellipses, that's the 3 dots, to show when to pause. So if you notice in print, we would do that with a comma, probably. But in broadcast, commas are kind of hard to see, so we give people more visual cues there. So quarterback Tony Romo says he'll be ready. First of all, let me just read this sentence without the punctuation. Quarterback Tony Romo says he'll be ready to play and win this next season. Okay, so that's what the words were on the screen. Now let me read it with the punctuation that helps me emphasize those words. Quarterback Tony Romo says he'll be ready to play and win this next season. So you can see how that punctuation helped me emphasize and win completely changes the tone of the sentence. You can either do that with dashes or ellipses, whichever you feel more comfortable with. If you do start working in a newsroom, your talent will probably let you know, hey, I prefer dashes, I prefer ellipses. So in that case, you need to conform to what they like because they're the ones that are going to be reading it. We also use the asterisk to surround a word that needs emphasis. So I could have done that earlier sentence this way as well. So say we're doing a story about city council picking a consulting firm, and if your last sentence is city council has to pick a firm by tomorrow, it's factually accurate, but it doesn't really give that sense of timeliness. But if you hammer home city council has to pick a firm by tomorrow, now you've kind of given that sense of urgency in that sentence that it deserves. So punctuation can be your friend to help you read in broadcast. Difference number 9, we avoid abbreviations. Abbreviations are very bad in broadcast. The main reason is because we're reading this stuff live on the air. So if you put abbreviations in there and the person who's reading doesn't understand your abbreviation, get ready for your story or your newscast to end up on YouTube on the blooper reel. So in broadcast, we spell out just about everything. A couple of the biggest offenders here, if you just write, let's see, Hopkins Street, and you write Hopkins ST. Now, does that mean Hopkins Saint, Hopkins Street? You might think, yes, that's easy enough. You should know that I mean Hopkins Street, but you never want to assume in broadcast. So DR, same thing. We're on a campus where there are a lot of doctors. So is that a drive? Is it doctor? Spell out Sesam's Drive, Sesam's DRIVE. Do not write Sesam's DR. Well-known acronyms can be used, and when I say well-known, I mean places that you only recognize them by their acronyms. So the FBI, the IRS, the CIA, something like UTSA, which is University of Texas, San Antonio. UTSA is its common name. SMU. Those are ones where you can see we put the dash in between because we're reading each letter individually. FBI. So that's what that dash means. I have an example there, NCAA or NCAA. It's because that name is said 2 different ways. Both are correct. It's just how you want it pronounced is how you would write it. So if you want the anchor to say NCAA, you would actually spell out the word double. So again, for acronyms, you use hyphens to denote that every letter is going to be read individually. Now, if the name is an acronym but it's pronounced just like a word, you don't need hyphens. So NASA, you don't say NASA, so you just write out NASA like it is. NATO, same thing. OPEC, same thing. So it depends on how the acronym is pronounced, whether you will have hyphens or not in it with it. A couple other notes about symbols. Just avoid them. We don't use them because in TV we have a teleprompter, and sometimes the teleprompters don't read symbols. So if you need to write dollars, we write out the word dollars. Instead of percent, we write out the word percent. This also goes to email addresses. So if you ever have to give out an email address on the air, which, man, that's quite a lengthy. Let me just read that. db28455@txstate.edu. Took about 6 seconds for me to read. If you only have 15 seconds in your script, you probably don't want to dedicate 6 of those seconds for one email address, so you'd probably want to write around that. But if an email address is a necessity in your story, again, you would put hyphens in between each letter or number that needs to be pronounced separately. So db28455, then the letter at, or the word at, t-x, so it's at txstate.edu. So that's how we would write out an email address. Same thing with a phone number, 512-245-6507. It would be 5-1-2 space 2-4-5 space 6-5-0-7. Finally, number 10, we round off numbers and we spell them out. In general, numbers are really hard and can create massive, massive problems in a broadcast story, and they take a really long time to read. So you want to avoid numbers as much as possible. You won't be able to completely avoid them, but what we do is we round up, we round down, we try to make it more relatable to the viewer. So in print, we might say something like the thief stole $397,945 worth of jewelry. You'll see how long, or you heard how long it took me to actually read that sentence. So in broadcast, we would just say the thieves stole nearly $400,000 worth of jewelry. We just round it up, and you'll also notice the difference in numbers in style there. 400-1000 space dollars is how we would write that out. A few other really important notes about numbers here. The number 0, actually spell it out, 0, because the number itself might look like an O on the prompter. So spell out 0. Then 1 through 11 you spell out as words. The reason why we include 11 in that is because it might look like 2 L's on the teleprompter. So go ahead and spell out 1 through 11. So 1 O-N-E, T-W-O, on to 11. 12 through 999, go ahead and use the numbers. So if it's 643, just write 643. But anything more than 999, so 1,000 on, use a combination of numbers and words. So again, if it was 1,000, you would write the number 1-1000. And try to round off as much as possible to help the story make more sense. A couple of closing thoughts. We talked about this in class Monday, but we get one shot to make this story make sense in broadcast. You have to make it as simple as possible, not just for the talent to read on air, but for the viewer at home to understand. So remember, unlike print where they can go back and reread if they're confused, we cannot assume they can go back and re-watch or re-listen to the story, because in most cases they can't. The story has to make sense on the first time. All right, so that's broadcast differences 1 through 10. I'm going to send you a exercise of a couple of different sentences that I want you to rewrite before class on Wednesday. We'll go over them in class on Wednesday, and then don't forget to go and take the online quiz. It will be available starting at midnight and will be open until 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday.